The gaming scene in recent years has seen many games try to recapture the lightning in a bottle that was the cult success of Dark Souls. But despite many spirited and sometimes high-quality attempts, there are none that seem capable of dethroning the mainline Soulsborne series. My name is Lemondrop, and let's talk about why FromSoftware has remained the undisputed champions of this section of the RPG market. It's hard to exactly nail down the secret formula to Souls games, but there are elements that are readily obvious to a quick level of analysis. Nearly every Souls game, and subsequently Souls-likes, features limited healing that can only be refilled at dedicated checkpoints throughout a level, or hitbox-based melee combat, as opposed to tab targeting or other forms of auto-aiming combat. Usually they feature a roguelike mechanic of losing something on death that can be recovered on your next attempt, or potentially lost forever. The aesthetics of Souls-like are similarly formulaic, featuring bleak, ruined surroundings and twisted stories exploring religious themes and the darker sides of humanity's nature. However, trying to define and nail down what makes a game a Souls-like is where I believe the various attempts at the genre fail. It can be easy to dismiss FromSoft's domination of the Souls-like market. After all, they literally created the genre, taking the typical hack-and-slash RPG formula and transforming it into their own brand. However, I don't think it necessarily stands to reason that someone who invents something is going to be the same one to perfect it, especially in the realm of software, where iteration takes little more than time and determination. The problem with Souls-likes is that they're directly trying to retread ground that FromSoft has already explored. The majority of games, when you click on the Souls-like tab of Steam, are going to be those derivative works. Games that are copying FromSoft's homework and changing it a little and hoping people won't notice. Games like Neo, Mortal Shell, The Surge, and even more recent additions such as Lords of the Fall in 2023 or Lies of P feel more like derivative works that are trying to mix and match Soulsborne pieces into a Frankenstein's monster of game design. Lies of P especially has received lots of praise from Souls fans as being the best non-FromSoft Souls-like.
I gotta agree with Rocket Man that I think that this is the best non-From Souls-like game, for sure, from top to bottom.
Played Lies of P and it said it's not the best Souls-like. It is the best Souls-like. I think Lies of P is definitively the best Souls-like I've played.
I think this is the best Souls-like, and the closest thing you're going to get to a FromSoftware game that doesn't actually come from FromSoftware.
I will say that this video is not a review because I haven't played the game, but I've seen enough from streams and other reviews to convince me that it's too much of an amalgamation of what From has already done better. Lies of P could never hold a candle to a mainline Soulsborne entry because it's not wishing upon a star, it's trying to keep up with just its own neighbor. It borrows far too heavily from what a Souls game is supposed to be like, mixing elements of Bloodborne with the usual fare of Dark Souls combat and design choices. You could at least make your UI not look like a stock Unreal Engine recreation of a Dark Souls game. I would also argue that a lot of the cheesier elements of what if Pinocchio was a messed up action RPG would have been right at home with the over-the-top nature of a character action game. Fans of games like Metal Gear Rising or Devil May Cry are already used to absurd and narratively dissonant elements of a story with serious and comical moments interwoven. Like most Souls-likes, the insistence on limiting the scope of inspiration to one source resulted in a stunted potential. As a sidebar, the forgivability of being a copycat is also somewhat tied into the price of the game. $60 is a big boy price, the same price as Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3. If you're charging $60, I'm expecting a game that is substantially different from its competitors, not just a smorgasbord of a solitary other studio's ideas. I'm not going to pay $60 for Warhammer Souls, Anime Souls, and certainly not this Timothée Chalamet-looking Pinocchio Souls. I did play and enjoy Timesia, which I can only describe as playing Sekiro with a few weapons from Dark Souls set in the world of Bloodborne, and also it's green. But at less than half the price of Dark Souls 3 or Sekiro, Timesia wasn't trying to communicate that it was some kind of AAA-worthy product. I was willing to accept its fan fiction nature because it didn't ask me to take it as anything but an indie attempt at the Souls formula. This copycat mentality isn't limited to just external studios either. FromSoftware themselves had a pitfall in Dark Souls 2, which was made by a team not led by Miyazaki, and therefore fails to understand what the secret sauce behind Dark Souls is. Dark Souls 2 feels like a mockery of its predecessor, leaning into making a game based on tropes of what a Souls-like, or I suppose at that time, just what a Dark Souls game is supposed to be like. They assumed that because combat was hard and death was worked into a feature, that being a Dark Souls game was about dying a lot, whereas Dark Souls was always about overcoming challenges, your death being only a setback intended to make you resolved to rise again and overcome. Dark Souls 2 set out to try to kill the player as much as possible. Rather than dangle the reward in front of you and ask you to overcome a challenge to achieve it, Dark Souls 2 relied on taunting the player like a playground bully to try to invoke some kind of reverse psychology to make you want to keep playing. I could go on about the unfairness and bad design of Dark Souls 2, but that's a topic that's been well tread already. Dark Souls 2 remains the great value Dark Souls, despite the wave of contrarians who have risen up in recent days to pretend that it isn't a husk of its predecessor. The adage goes, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. But I think more applicable in this situation would be the reverse. If you can't join 'em, beat 'em. What I mean by this is that if you can't make something that directly outshines its peers, then remember that you don't have to actually limit yourself to just doing what your competition is doing. You don't have to make your game a Souls-like.
No one's putting a gun to your head.
You are not obligated to adhere to the design choices of FromSoftware, even if your intent is to appeal to the same demographic who enjoy those games. You don't have to have a D-pad item bar, or similar button mapping as Souls. You don't have to have basic enemies that pose substantial threat at all times. You don't have to have death and recovery mechanics, or your own cheesy spin on the iconic Soulsborne "you died" screen. By limiting your game to what Souls games do, you're stunting your own potential and forcing the comparison to that series. In fact, I would argue that FromSoft themselves are limited in their potential to only linear improvements by what their fans expect of a FromSoft Souls-like title. Despite the mainline Souls series being concluded, games like Elden Ring and its eventual DLC are limited in scope to additive improvements to the formula, rather than dramatic shifts that break the mold. As a proof negative, games like Dead Cells or Hollow Knight significantly alter the Souls formula in the shift to a 2D game. Even major 3D games like God of War 2016 were obviously influenced by Souls, adopting a button mapping closer to FromSoft's design and shifting to a more methodical combat system, complete with dodges and parries. I'm by no means trying to say that Souls has a monopoly on melee combat, or even melee combat using certain button mappings, but there is a point where a combination of features shows undeniable influence. Even still, the final product was more focused on narrative, and separated enough in its other design choices that it wasn't just Greek Souls. I'll wrap up with this. To paraphrase what T.S. Eliot wrote, "Immature artists imitate. Mature artists steal. Bad artists deface what they take, and good artists make it into something better, or at least something different." The best Souls-likes are only tangentially describable as a Souls-like. It's not enough to change a single variable in the Souls formula and hope that you can compete. But if you draw inspiration from multiple different sources, you're not competing just to make the best non-FromSoft Souls-like, but a game comparable only to itself. This is most likely my last video of 2023, so thank you to everyone who's joined me this year, especially in the last half since my Counter-Strike video blew up. I know a lot of you probably subscribed expecting more Counter-Strike content, but the CS2 release has been underwhelming, let's say. However, with that said, there's plenty of content that I have planned for this channel, and if you're interested in supporting videos like these, I'm excited to announce that I've officially launched a Patreon, and you can find the link to it in the description. Subscribing there will get you 1 week early and ad-free access to content going forward, in addition to making more regular production a possibility for me. I'm always looking to improve the quality of my work, and I appreciate your support, whether that's financial or just by watching my content. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and if you have opinions about Souls-likes, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I welcome respectful discussion in the comments. Subscribe to stay tuned for future productions, and as always, thank you for watching, and long may the sun shine.